Hello, and happy marvelous Monday, everybody. I hope that you are well. I'm super excited that you are joining me today. I'm your host, Karissa, and this is what I do each and every Monday. I bring you information for landlords as well as tenants, hopefully to positively impact the entire rental community. I promise that my only goal today is to share information and to make sure that it's relevant, to make sure that it's clear and to answer any questions that you have. However, the information that I share is not legal advice. However, I am sharing the industry's best tips and practices for the subject matter at hand. And so today I'm going to touch on the 5 ways that landlords can avoid discrimination by tenants. And so I hope that you are taking notes. Please, ma'am, please, sir, share this information, like, tag, and share it with somebody else, especially those who are landlords, those who are housing providers, or those who are looking to become a landlord in the residential space. All right. So, first and foremost, I like to acknowledge my viewers. Please let me know where you're tuned in from. I just want to say welcome to all of you who are on Facebook. Welcome to those of you who are watching on Twitter, on LinkedIn, and YouTube. I'm so excited that you're joining me today. I'm going to share some information because I believe that it's going to be helpful to a lot of landlords. I've received some emails regarding this subject matter, and I just thought it would be fitting to share it with you today, if that's all right. And so, again, if you have comments, if you have remarks or observations, please go ahead and drop it in the comment section. I just want to make sure that I get all of that in the way before I get started today. If this is your first time tuning in, thank you so much. Just want to also let you guys know that I'm live on YouTube. If you have not already subscribed to my YouTube channel, please go over to YouTube, smash that subscribe button, as well as that notification bell so that you'll be the first to know when I am live and online. And so each week, I bring a different topic, just discussing different and various matters pertaining to the rental space, be it for landlords as well as for tenants. And so today, this session is all about landlords. I don't have any tips for tenants, but if you are a tenant, please listen in. So I do want all of my landlords to tune in. Please make sure that if you have questions, put your questions in. I want to make sure that I'm answering it. I'm going to move really quickly today, but I do have 5 things that I do want to share because we're starting to see an uptick with rental scam in the rental communities. And so I just want to touch on that a little bit. Share some information from that space. But before I get started, I want to acknowledge some viewers who are here today. I see that Kim is tuned in. Thank you so much for tuning in, Kim. Hey, Lynette, thank you so much for tuning in. All right, so let me get into the meat of the discussion today because we are definitely going to dive and we're going to touch on some critical issues that negatively impact landlords as well as tenants, actually, because when these type of matters happen in the rental community, sometimes and in many cases it requires that the landlord business practice change, or maybe there's a loss of revenue, or maybe because there is a loss of revenue that the landlord or the owners can't provide services that they initially intended to provide. And so those are significant impacts, and I'm definitely going to touch on that today because I want people to understand how greatly and how heavy this weighs on the rental community. So rental scams in and of itself, like I said, it does have a significant impact. All right. But these scams not only are creating financial issues, but it can also harm a landlord's reputation. And how is that possible? I'm glad that you asked. Because if a landlord has been a target of rental scam, then usually renters don't want to rent in that community because they know that maybe the services are going to be different. Maybe the landlord will not treat them the same, or maybe there's going to be a stricter criteria, and it should be. But there are so many consequences that comes out of this. So I'm going to get into that in a little bit. Hey, Ronnie G, thank you so much for tuning in. Absolutely. I'm here to tackle all of the hard issues and concerns that I know that have been showing up in the rental community space. All right, so the first thing that I do want to share is that when there is some sort of rental scam, and in many cases, there is a financial loss, right? So I touched on that, how it impacted the landlord. When there's a financial loss, that is bad for business. All right, that's definitely bad for business because if let me just speak to the small housing providers. So let's say you own a 2 or 4 unit building, right? And you have been hit by rental scam and it's impacted your bottom line, meaning that the money that you thought that you would have coming into that rental property business, you no longer have. Um, that's a big negative. That's a big negative right there, first and foremost. And I also want to I want to put a plug here when it comes to the financial loss, because with the financial loss, sometimes that's not anything that a landlord is anticipating in terms of their budget going through. Sometimes that money is not earmarked. So let's say, for instance, you have a scammer, and I've had a colleague of mine who this happened to in DC, and they have a really large property in, I think it's near Gallaudet area, that Noma, New York Avenue area. And so they have a large property there. They were hit hard back to back, and they believed that it was the same person. And so what happened was they had a tenant who came through, um, and the tenant, they, for whatever reason, I don't know if they just didn't do a thorough background check, but in any event, the tenant came through, presented checks. The rent is, I think that unit went for like 4,200 a month. Okay. So the tenant provided a check for 3 months worth of rent plus the security deposit. Okay. And so the property manager allowed the tenant to move in. The check had not cleared yet. Okay. So let me just say that the for whatever reason they were allowed to move in, the payment had not cleared. Come to find out, the check bounced. It was a personal check. It did bounce. That check never cleared. The tenant was allowed to sign the lease. Okay. And the property manager followed up with the tenant to say, hey, Mr. and Mrs. Tenant, just want to let you know that your check didn't clear. We need you to come to the office so that you can make good on your payment. Well, the tenant had signed the lease, had keys to the place. So the security deposit payment didn't go through. The rent payments didn't go through for the first few months. And so this landlord suffered a significant loss because not only did they not have money from the tenant before they moved in, they had to take the tenant to court. And because they didn't have accurate or correct information for the tenant, that process was delayed. And so the tenant used a fake name and ended up doing the same thing a second time at the same building. I don't know how that was allowed to happen, but true story, it did happen. It hurt my heart to hear this because it sounds like maybe their frontliners, the people in the maybe their staff in the front office didn't do a good job. I don't know who dropped the ball, but all I know is it cost them a lot of money. And eventually they were able to get the tenant out, but this tenant had now 2 units at the same building where they were not they just were not honest people. And this happens. And this happens more than a lot of people know. And so that's why I want to share this information today. Also, when there are rent scams, sometimes there's an unusual vacancy period that is prolonged. And so, for instance, let's say the building that I just told you about, right? So let's say, for instance, those 2 units, the tenant had to be taken to court. And so those units were offline because there was no revenue. There's no revenue coming in. Not only that, but the tenant damaged, I don't know how they had 2 apartments, but there were significant damages to both of the units. And so those units had to be taken offline for an extended period of time. This is a big red flag. This is something that's happening in a lot of communities, not just in my area, but all throughout the United States. People are being hit hard. Scammers are finding ways to undercut, to shortcut, to rip landlords off. And, it is unfortunate that sometimes bad things happen to good people. And I know that that's something that you never anticipate as a landlord, having to go through these type of matters. But I do want you to be aware that scammers are on the rise. Okay, scammers are on the rise. They're looking for loopholes. They're looking for ways to scam landlords. They're looking for ways to not pay rent. They're looking for ways, and in many cases, I've started to see a lot of court cases where tenants are starting to sue landlords for just all types of stuff, right? And in many cases, it's fraud. A lot of it is fraud. So I touched on damage to the property, but I also do want to touch on this, that sometimes when there is fraud in a rental community, it can negatively damage a landlord's reputation, because now they may have this negative cloud over them that their rental community have scammers, which can deter people from wanting to rent from you in your community. And I know that that's not something that a landlord have control over, but when this happens, sometimes that is a consequence. All right. So I wanted to just share that with you, but let me just share some tips for landlords to hopefully help you um, from going down this rabbit hole. Okay. So the first thing that I definitely will recommend is that landlords, please, if you have a small rental business and you're able to meet with tenants face to face, I would definitely recommend that. It's not a requirement. You obviously have options. And I know that we're now in a space where a lot of what we do is automated or it's online, and I know that a lot of it is not really in person. But for those of you, if you have a fear that you have been scammed, or maybe you have in the past, or you are trying to prevent yourself from going down that lane, then go ahead and meet with prospects face to face, because here is where you get to establish a rapport with your prospective tenant. You want to get to know who they are. You want to meet with them face to face. If they're making payment, if they're paying by check, you want to make sure that you have in your application process, and it should be streamlined, that if they're paying by check or cashier's check or money order, that, and again, it's not a requirement, but you could make this part of your practice, meaning that the payment must clear before they're actually able to sign the lease and given keys to move into the property. Because when you allow them to move in and the payment has not cleared, then sometimes you run a risk of maybe not getting that money. Okay. And it is a business. If you've been following me, you know that one of my philosophies is, if you treat it like a business, it will pay you like a business. If you treat it like a hobby, meaning that you allow tenants to move in without payment, without signing a lease, and you just give them the keys, and obviously you're going to get paid like it's a hobby. Okay. Don't put yourself through that. Um, Try to avoid that at all costs if possible. And I know that sometimes that's hard for many people who have a heart for people. You have a heart for tenants. You want to do the right thing. You want to provide housing that's decent, that's safe and sanitary. And I know that a lot of you are putting a lot of money into your rental properties, and in some cases, maybe I had this conversation yesterday, and someone said, well, Karissa, maybe we put too much money in the property. And I see that often, but it just speaks to your heart. It speaks to the level of respect that you have for your prospective tenants and your actual tenants. But again, if you can meet with them face to face, make sure that you do that. Make sure you streamline your application process. Make sure that it's clear that, again, if they're paying by way of check or cashier's check or money order, that the payment clears first. And sometimes that takes a little bit longer. Okay. I've seen money orders that didn't clear. It's possible. People are finding a way to get what they want, and they're being really creative. Okay. All right. I see your comments. I'm coming to you. Give me 1 second. And the second thing I want to share today is to make sure that you are thoroughly screening your tenants. Make sure, hey, Lady Isaac, thank you so much for tuning in. Make sure that you are thoroughly screening your applicants. And when you are doing that, you want to make sure that you're checking their background information. You want to verify their previous place of residency. Okay. And then the third thing is you want to verify their income and employment. So if they're working, go ahead and verify that. Get current pay stubs, do an employment verification form, send it to the job, maybe contact the employer to confirm that they actually work there, or maybe they don't work, right? Maybe they still have income because everybody is not employed, but they still have income and can afford to rent. All right. So you want to make sure that whatever the source of income is, that it is verified. Now, for participants in some sort of housing subsidy program, that subsidy will act as their proof of income. That's a source of income. And you can verify that by confirming. So for instance, if it's someone in the Section 8 program, you want to verify how many how many bedrooms is on the voucher. Let me just also say that when it comes to a Section 8 housing choice voucher participant tenant, the voucher does not have a dollar amount. Okay, so if you get someone who want to rent your place, maybe they're in a Section 8 program, right? And they say, hey, Mr. and Mrs. Landlord, I would like to rent to you. I'm currently participating in a Section 8 program, and my voucher will cover up to $4,000. Let me just say that the voucher does not have a dollar amount. So you always want to verify the bedroom size. You can always reach out to that housing authority or that housing agency to confirm the maximum amount that that agency could pay for that specific bedroom size. Now, let me just also state that just because let's use this instance where the rent is $4,000 and the tenant say, well, Mr. and Mrs. Landlord, I have a voucher and it'll cover up to $5,000, right? So it doesn't mean that the agency is going to pay you the maximum amount. It also depends on location. We know that in real estate, that location is everything. And I'm sure you've probably heard location, location, location. The same is true when you have tenants who are participating in some sort of housing program. So I'm going to pause here and then I'm going to come back to the other two tips that I have for you. Hey, Ms. Davis, thank you so much for tuning in today. I hope that you are well. All right. I am seeing that you're tuned in from YouTube. Some of you are on LinkedIn as well as Facebook. Thank you so much for that. All right. And so here's another thing that could reduce the possibility of you getting or being scammed by a tenant. All right. You want to make sure that you use secure payment methods. There is nothing wrong with accepting personal checks and cashier's checks and money orders, but you also want to make sure that there is a secure way for them to make payment. And so if it's online, if it's Zelle, if it's Venmo, if it's PayPal, make sure that it is a secure method. Okay. Sometimes scammers will want to rush and they'll say, oh, well, I'll pay you by way of PayPal, and I'll pay you for 1 year, right? Sometimes people have the money. Sometimes it could be a scam, but you want to make sure that the source, whatever the source is for you to collect that payment, make sure that it's secure, make sure that it cannot be returned, or maybe sometimes, and what I've seen happen is that they'll pay and then all of a sudden they'll cancel the payment. All right. You want to make sure that you see the money before you put keys in hand. So before there are butts in seat, you want to have money in the bank account. All right. You want to make sure that those payments clear. And then also you want to also make sure that you be aware of an urgency, right? So let's say, for instance, you have an applicant that comes through and they say, oh, well, Ms. Day, I would love to rent your place. I'm going to be out of town, so I need to lease up in 2 days. I'll have someone to bring you the payment and get the keys, and I can follow with you later. In many cases, that could be a scam. And if it's not a scam, it should be a red flag. Now, I'm not saying that people don't have legit urgencies and emergencies, because we know that life happens, right? And I had a tenant where She was going to move in 2 weeks. She had death in the family. She was traveling out of the area. I had a heart, for her and her, her situation, the death in the family, and we did make some sort of concessions for her. But in that, we were extra careful to make sure that we dotted every I and we crossed every T. We did not allow her to move in before the payment cleared. We made sure that she understood that even with the lease signing process, everything had to be signed up front. We had to do a moving inspection together. We had to do a walkthrough together because that's just part of the application process. And we do not go above, beyond, under, or around the policies that are in place to help us run our business like a business. And so I wanted to share those tips with you today because, like I said, I know that there are a lot of scammers out here. A lot of landlords are being ripped off. And these are just some tips. I shared 5 today, and I could definitely share more, but I want you to have that. And I want you to understand how serious this matter is because when you're scammed and you're ripped off, it doesn't feel good, right? And then at the end of the day, you're the person who's suffering because you've tried to do the right thing, which is to provide housing that's decent, safe, and sanitary. You're trying to provide not just housing, but quality housing. For some of you, you have mortgages, you have bills that have to be paid on a rental property. And so I'm sure the last thing that you want to happen is someone to come in, rip you off, and it take you months and a whole lot of money if you have to go to court just to try to get your rental property back. So I hope that some of this has helped you today. You said Ronnie G had a scammer call the attorney general on you, stating that you were taking application money and denying the opportunity to rent. That is so unfortunate. Listen, I had a young lady who, and this was many, many years ago because I had actually gotten out of managing property. And so I had a young lady very similar to this, but they didn't contact attorney general. But that's really bad, right? You never want your name out there, and especially when it's something that you haven't done. I can do a whole show on that, but it won't be today. So, but I had like you, Ronnie G, I had a young lady who was renting a property, well, trying to rent a property, and we told her what the application process was. And fortunately for us, we did an open house. And so with an open house, we have multiple people coming to view the property at the same time. I love healthy competition, right? And so in any event, this young lady, she really liked the place. She submitted an application, but she did not submit the requirements, which includes the application fee, birth certificates, social security cards for all occupants in the household, anybody 18 and over, a photo ID, proof of income, bank statements, all of that, right? And so this young lady had only submitted, I think she had maybe like 6 children, right? So she submitted documentation for, let's say, 3 out of 6 kids. And so, my team explained to her, well, we apologize. We can't complete the process because we need everybody's information. And so, long story short, she never provided all of the information for all of the kids. And so, we had to let her know that we moved on to another applicant because we did complete the background check. We could not return her application fee. And so she said that we were trying to rip her off and get rich off of application fees. And it was a little hilarious to us because, we can't get rich off of a $25 application fee. It costs $25 to use that service. And so the prospects or the applicants, they pay whatever the service fee is. Like, for whatever reason, I don't know what made her or anybody think that a landlord could get rich off an application fee. It's no way humanly possible off of $25 that somebody can get rich. And believe it or not, for those of you who are tenants, because I do recognize that I have tenants who do watch this show, there is a fee to conduct the background check. And usually the landlord would charge you whatever that fee is to get the information that's required to determine if you are a good fit for the property. So, Ronnie G, that is not good, but thank you so much for sharing that. You told AG You didn't collect any money because you use a third party, Safe Rent, to process the application. Very good. And so one of the things that I do now is I use, and I strongly recommend that if you are a housing provider, if you're managing someone else's property, use an online platform for the application fee. That way, just as Ronnie G is sharing, just as I've shared, when you allow tenants to use a third party company to process that background check, they're paying that company, they're not paying you. You're not accused of scamming. Now, I will say that I do know landlords previously, years prior, back in the day, whereas they would take application fees from multiple tenants, and maybe they didn't run a background check, but they definitely didn't refund the money. And some people have done that. I know that some people are still doing it. I don't want to assume that everybody's using electronic processes, for your rental property business. Hey, Sherry, thank you so much for tuning in. You said, can I please get some help with countersuing my landlord for retaliatory and illegal eviction in Indiana? Sherry, absolutely. Let me pull up my email address. Please email me. And when you email me, Sherry, provide your name, your city and state, provide me the best contact number to reach you on it, and I would definitely follow up with you. So let me pull up my email address for you. It's going to be info@landlordlife.com. Give me 1 second. And this is what I do. I provide information for landlords as well as tenants. All right. So here's my email address, Sherry. Please make a note of it. Please email me. As a matter of fact, email me right now if you can. info@landlordlife.com. I will respond to you. I'll reach back out to you and follow up with you. All right. So that's my email address. Thank you so much for your comments. Thank you for tuning in today. I hope that something that I shared today was of value for you if you are a landlord. And if you have questions as a tenant, let me just open the floor up for you. You can ask your tenant questions, drop it in the comment section. I'll wait a few minutes if there are any. If you're a landlord, if you have questions pertaining to this subject matter or any other landlord and tenant service, landlord and tenant matters, you can also drop your comment in the comment box. I'll wait a few seconds to see if any comes in. But I do want to do a quick recap of what I shared today because I shared 5 tips for landlords to avoid being scammed. All right. And these are the tips. I strongly suggest that if you're a landlord, if you have an opportunity, you can definitely meet face to face. You can definitely do a thorough screening of all of your tenants. Don't do a partial screening, but do a thorough screening because that's how you get to know who's going to be in your property. That's how you can cherry pick from the best prospects that you have in a pool waiting to rent your place. You can also verify income and employment. You don't have to just take people's word, but just verify that information. Go a step above and beyond to make sure that you are verifying that information. And if you cannot verify it, you can move on to someone that you can verify or who may be a good fit. I've also shared that it is good to use a secure payment method. And I also suggest that you please, ma'am, please, sir, be aware of the urgency of unusual requests from people who are trying to rent your property. These are 5 tips that can help landlords avoid going down a rabbit hole and being scammed by tenants. Okay. All right. So any questions here? Ms. Davis, you said, can a landlord effectively cancel a lease in DC? That is a great question. Let me answer it like this. Here's your part 2 of that question, especially if the tenant is now a squatter. Okay. Great question. Thank you so much. So, can you effectively cancel a lease in DC? Effectively means that there is a reason. That is it should match Department of Housing and Community Development criteria. So, for instance, if it's non-payment of rent, if there is a lease violation, and you take this tenant to court, the judge would ultimately have the final say. So, in other words, if it's a squatter, if it's even if it's a violation of the lease, it could be a repeated violation of the lease, right? You still have to take this tenant to court. You can't just say, "Oh, well, you know what, Mr. and Mrs. Tenant, you've been a bad tenant. You've been a tenant from hell. It hasn't worked out. I'm just going to cancel the lease." Doesn't work like that in DC, because in DC it is pro tenant. DC is one of the worst jurisdictions when it comes to landlord and tenant laws. And so it is hard as heck. All right. It's hard as heck to get a tenant out. Um, and you could, so let's say, for instance, you want to move back into the property. You could give your tenant a notice to vacate. I believe this might be a 90-day notice for personal use and occupancy. Now, if that's the case, and I see your comment, so I'm coming to that. So for personal use and occupancy, there is a time frame that you must not rent the property, meaning that if you're telling a tenant they have to move because you are going to move back into the property, you're going to make that place your primary residence, then you must adhere to the time frame that DC has put in place, because if not, that tenant could come back and sue you and would win. So I just wanted to put that in there, because that's just how DC laws are. They are strongly in favor of tenants. I know that it's a nightmare for a lot of landlords. I know that some landlords hate DC landlord and tenant laws. I know that some landlords will never rent because the laws in DC are so pro tenant. But unfortunately, that's the unfortunate part about it. There's no way to get around it. Unfortunately, you can go to meetings, you can go to city council, you can voice your concerns, but until the laws are changed, they are what they are, and they are in place, strongly in favor of the tenant. So I wish I had better news for you, but that's the best way that I could answer that. All right, so that is it. Those are the tips that I wanted to share today. I hope that this was helpful. I hope that you find value in this, and please make sure that you are tuned in each and every Monday at 7:30 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, right here, whether it's on Facebook, whether it's LinkedIn, YouTube, or now Twitter. This is where you can find me. Every week is a different topic. And just by way of announcement, I am super excited to share that I am now getting ready to share the date for my 3-day online landlord bootcamp. And so if you are interested, if you want more information about that, that is my email address at the bottom of the screen there. It's info@landlordlife.com. If you are in the DC metropolitan area, I'm happy to provide consulting, coaching, inspection, and other property management services. For more information or to book a call with me, please email me. Again, that is my email address at the bottom of the screen. I'm Karissa, the landlord and tenant coach. My time is up, and I thank you for yours. I hope to see you next Monday at 7:30 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. And for those of you who are watching the replay, thank you so much, guys. I will see you all next week, 7:30 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. I'm going to say bye for now.